Okay, so in our diagram tool, let's take a look at the visual representation of a project architecture using AWS services. So the serverless framework is mainly used with AWS. Most of the examples are showcasing AWS services. I know it states in the documentation it can be used with other vendors as well. But for this tutorial series, we will be using AWS. And AWS has a lot of services it provides, but most of them you will not need. And we will be covering some of the important ones in this series. And we will be using some of these services to showcase the architecture. So let's start with the first service, AWS API Gateway. That's what the short stands for. This basically gives us a RESTful API. So we have the /products with a query string, with a post method and a get and a put and a delete. We have this ability to set up endpoints that trigger specific functions. And these functions can run in any programming language, and in a serverless fashion, it can run on AWS Lambda. So now we have this type of setup where AWS API Gateway has some endpoints that connect and trigger some function with some logic. And let's say that function would like to connect to the database. Then we have AWS RDS service running with a PostgreSQL database. So this is pretty much just a managed database from AWS. There are multiple different database types you can use. And then this Lambda can connect and talk to this Postgres database through its connection string, just like you would do with a normal database setup in a project. Then we can add more services and just grow this architecture where we have this AWS bucket, S3 bucket that handles files, so we can upload images or video files or just normal storage JSON files. And we can trigger AWS Lambda functions based off of lifecycles. So whenever a new file, or in S3 terms, whenever a new object gets created, we can trigger some or set up some triggers that calls a Lambda to resize this image or add this image string to the database, or just do some logic with that image at the end of the day. Then we also have this ability to set up caching for Redis and Elasticsearch and a bunch of other services to make our architecture even more robust or scalable. And we can do this whole type of setup with Serverless Framework in a very neat and organized way, because like you can see, there are some stuff that needs to be interconnected with each other in a secure way, and AWS has this concept of IAM rules, identity access management, where you have roles that you can assign this Lambda to connect to this database and so forth to the rest of the other services. And Serverless Framework handles a lot of that under the hood for us. So it kind of does this setup between AWS Lambda and AWS Gateway in a very smooth way. And this connection between some lifecycle event to AWS Lambda in a very, very clean way. And then this Lambda will use the AWS SDK for its specific language, and it will connect to these different services, whether it's S3 or database or caching. So for our server that we're going to build, we're not going to have a cache, so we can remove that service, and we're going to be using DynamoDB, which is the NoSQL database of Amazon, to build our API. And our API will have a few endpoints. We will have a post books endpoint. So let's just build a basic book API. So we'll have this type of project set up. This API will be pretty simple, but it's going to showcase you how we can set up a basic API like this, which can become very complicated at some point. You can have a bunch of different endpoints and a bunch of different services to make this application scalable. And then yeah, this is going to be the idea. We will be able to upload images when we upload a book or update a book. So this will have like a image connected to the book, and we will use Lambda to handle this, saving to DynamoDB and optimizing the image with Sharp package. So yeah, this will be the architecture, and let's actually start in the next video where we will start setting up the project.